Imagine remembering everything. Every conversation you've ever had, every meal you've ever eaten, every face you've ever seen, every song you've ever heard, every moment of pain, every moment of joy, all of it, perfectly preserved, impossible to erase. For most of us, this sounds like a superpower. For Jill Price, it was a curse. In the year 2000, a woman walked into a neuroscientist's office in California and said 5 words that would change our understanding of human memory forever. I can't forget anything. This is the story of the people who remember everything and what they've taught us about the most mysterious organ in the universe, the human brain. Jill Price was 34 years old when she finally reached out for help. Since the age of 14, she had been living with a condition she couldn't explain. Every day of her life since 1980 was catalogued in her mind with perfect clarity. Tell her a date, any date, and she could tell you what day of the week it was, what she wore, what she ate, what was on the news, how she felt. It wasn't a party trick she had practiced. It was automatic, involuntary, relentless. While the rest of us remember the highlights and lowlights of our lives, Jill remembered everything in between. The mundane Tuesday in 1987, the boring conversation in 1992, the embarrassing moment in 1995. All of it was there, vivid and immediate, as if it had happened yesterday. She described it as living with a split screen. One side showing the present, the other endlessly replaying the past. She wasn't looking for fame. She was looking for relief. Dr. James McGarr, a neuroscientist at the University of California, Irvine, had spent his career studying memory. He had seen patients with extraordinary memory skills, mnemonists who used tricks and techniques to remember long lists or numbers. But Jill was different. She wasn't using techniques. She wasn't trying. Her memory was automatic and complete. McGarr tested her for months, giving her random dates from the past 3 decades. She answered with startling accuracy, far beyond what chance or general knowledge could explain. When he cross-referenced her answers with historical records, news archives, and her own journals, they matched perfectly. McGarr realized he was looking at something that had never been documented in medical literature. He gave it a name, hypothymesia, from the Greek words for excessive and remembering. Jill Price was the first person ever diagnosed, but she wouldn't be the last. As word of the discovery spread, more people came forward. A man in Wisconsin, a woman in Australia, a violinist in New York. All of them shared the same experience. Total recall of their personal past, unbidden and uncontrollable. Scientists began to study their brains, looking for differences. What they found was surprising. These weren't people with larger brains or more neurons. In fact, their brains looked mostly normal, but there were subtle differences in specific regions, particularly the caudate nucleus and the temporal lobe, areas involved in habit formation and autobiographical memory. It appeared that their brains were processing and storing everyday experiences the same way most of us store significant emotional events. Every mundane moment was being encoded as if it were important. Their brains couldn't filter, they couldn't forget. We tend to think of forgetting as a failure, a glitch in the system. We forget where we put our keys, the name of someone we just met, what we had for lunch last Tuesday. It's frustrating. But forgetting is not a bug, it's a feature. Our brains are constantly bombarded with information, sights, sounds, smells, sensations. If we remembered all of it, we'd be paralyzed by data. Forgetting allows us to extract what's important and discard the rest. It allows us to generalize, to learn patterns, to move forward. People with hypothymesia don't have this luxury. They remember the pattern and every single exception to it. They remember the argument and every word that was said. They remember the heartbreak and every moment of the relationship that led to it. One patient described it as traveling through time without ever leaving the present. Another said, "I can't let go of anything." The past for them never really becomes the past. But hypothymesia is just one extreme. At the other end of the spectrum is a man known to science only as HM. In 1953, Henry Mollison underwent experimental brain surgery to cure his severe epilepsy. Surgeons removed portions of his hippocampus, a seahorse-shaped structure deep in the brain. The seizures stopped. But so did something else. HM could no longer form new long-term memories. He could remember his childhood, his teenage years, everything up until the surgery. But after that, nothing stuck. He could meet you, have a conversation, and 5 minutes later, have no memory of ever seeing you before. Every day was a blank slate. Every experience evaporated like water on hot pavement. He lived in a perpetual present, unable to learn, unable to change, unable to build a narrative of his life. Holm became one of the most studied individuals in neuroscience, teaching us that memory is not one thing but many, and that the hippocampus is the gateway through which short-term experiences become long-term memories. So what is memory, really? For centuries, people thought of it like a filing cabinet, information stored away, waiting to be retrieved. But modern neuroscience tells a different story. Memory is not a recording, it's a reconstruction. Every time you remember something, your brain rebuilds it from fragments, neurons firing in patterns, associations linking together, emotions coloring the details. And every time you remember, you change the memory slightly. You add new context. You edit out inconsistencies. You merge it with other memories. This is why eyewitness testimony is so unreliable. This is why siblings remember the same childhood event completely differently. We're not retrieving files, we're telling ourselves stories. And like all stories, they change with each retelling. People with hypothymesia experience this too. But their stories are anchored to an overwhelming amount of detail, making the reconstructions far more vivid and consistent than the rest of us could ever achieve. In 2006, researchers made another startling discovery. They found a group of people called super recognizers, individuals with an extraordinary ability to remember faces. Show them a face once, even in passing, and they'll recognize it years later in a different context, from a different angle, even aged significantly. Scotland Yard began recruiting super recognizers to help identify suspects from grainy security footage. They were far more accurate than facial recognition software. But like people with hypothymesia, super recognizers didn't choose their gift. One woman described walking through a crowded street as exhausting. She recognized people everywhere, from brief encounters years ago, and had to decide whether to acknowledge them or pretend not to notice. Another said she couldn't watch movies without being distracted by actors she'd seen in other roles, even as extras in the background. Once again, what seemed like a superpower came with a hidden cost. Then there are the savants, individuals, often with autism, who display extraordinary memory abilities alongside significant challenges in other areas. Kim Peek, the inspiration for the movie Rain Man, memorized over 12,000 books word for word. He could read 2 pages simultaneously, one with each eye, and never forgot what he read. Stephen Wiltshire can draw entire cityscapes from memory after a single helicopter ride, capturing thousands of buildings with remarkable accuracy. Daniel Tammet memorized 22,514 digits of pi and recited them without error over 5 hours. These abilities emerge from brains wired differently, where typical cognitive trade-offs don't apply, but savants often struggle with abstract thinking, social interaction, and filtering sensory input. Their gifts and their challenges are 2 sides of the same neurological coin, reminding us that the brain is always balancing, and that extraordinary ability in one domain often comes at a cost in another. So why do most of us have ordinary memories? Why aren't we all super recognizers or savants or hypothymeisiacs? The answer may lie in evolution. Our ancestors didn't need to remember every detail of every day. They needed to remember what mattered, where the food was, who could be trusted, which animals were dangerous. They needed to extract patterns from experience and make quick decisions. A brain that remembered everything would be slow, inflexible, unable to adapt. Forgetting gave us speed. It gave us creativity. It gave us the ability to imagine futures that didn't look like the past. In a very real sense, forgetting made us human. It allowed us to learn from experience without being trapped by it. It allowed us to change our minds, to forgive, to move on. The people with perfect memories show us what we'd lose if we couldn't forget. Jill Price, now in her 50s, has learned to live with her memory. She's written a book, given interviews, helped scientists understand her condition, but she's also been honest about the cost. She can't forget the people who hurt her. She can't forget her mistakes. She can't forget loss. Everyone else gets to edit their past, she once said. I have to live with the unedited version. Other people with hypothymesia report similar struggles, higher rates of anxiety, obsessive thinking, difficulty letting go of grudges or grief. But there are also unexpected gifts. They notice patterns others miss. They have a rich sense of their own history, a continuity of self that most of us lack. One man said, I know exactly who I am, because I remember every choice I've ever made. It's a trade-off. And like all trade-offs, it's not clearly good or bad, it's just different. Today, memory research is exploding. Scientists are learning how to enhance memory with electrical stimulation, how to suppress traumatic memories with drugs, how to implant false memories in mice and potentially in humans. We're approaching a future where memory might not be fixed, where we might be able to choose what we remember and what we forget. It sounds like science fiction, but the technology is already here in primitive forms. PTSD patients are being treated with therapies that weaken traumatic memories. Students are using nootropics to boost recall before exams. The ethical questions are staggering. If we can edit our memories, are we still ourselves? If we can forget trauma, do we lose the lessons it taught us? If we can remember everything, will we lose the ability to forgive and move forward? These aren't hypothetical questions anymore. They're choices we'll have to make in our lifetimes. There's a famous thought experiment in philosophy called the Ship of Theseus. If you replace every plank on a ship, one by one until none of the original material remains, is it still the same ship? Our memories are like that. They're constantly being rebuilt, edited, replaced. The person you were 10 years ago remembered things differently than you do now. The person you'll be 10 years from now will remember today differently than you do in this moment. We are not fixed beings with fixed pasts. We are stories we tell ourselves, and those stories change. People with hypothymesia remind us of this paradox. Even with perfect recall of facts, they still interpret, still feel differently about the same events over time. Memory gives us continuity, but it's the flexibility of memory, the forgetting, the editing, the reconstructing that gives us identity. We are not what we remember. We are what we choose to do with what we remember. On a quiet afternoon in California, Jill Price sits in her home, surrounded by decades of journals. She started writing them when her memory became overwhelming, a way to externalize what she couldn't escape internally. She flips to a random page, April 17th, 1991, and reads, "The memories flood back, as vivid as the day they were made." For a moment, she's 25 again, living a day that the rest of us would have forgotten long ago. She closes the journal and looks out the window. "People ask me if I'd want to be normal," she says. "I don't know how to answer that. This is the only normal I've ever known. In a world obsessed with remembering, with photos, videos, social media archives, Jill Price and others like her remind us of something we've forgotten, that forgetting is not the opposite of remembering. It's the partner, and together they make us human."